Time to start a new project, and this one is going to be a bench, a very rustic bench. Making this for a woman that my wife works with. Her name is Holly. She was born on Christmas Day. I think it was Christmas Day, Christmas Eve or Christmas Day. And Holly was given this piece of wood, and she would like a bench made out of it. And as I said, she wants it rustic. So that's what I'm going to do. But you can see that there's still bark on the edge of this. And while that may look nice and rustic, the problem with that is that over time, bark will flake off. So I can't make a bench with the bark still on. I have to remove that bark. And it's a pretty simple process. You just use whatever tools you have on hand. And in this case, I've been using a chisel, and I've worked underneath it, and you can see it's coming off in pretty large chunks. So I'll just get busy doing this. It would be kind of nice if I can get this off in one big chunk, and then maybe, just maybe, I can epoxy it back on, but I think it would probably be too rough. What I envision is this being the top, and since this is sloped, you'll sit facing this way, and your legs will hang over, and I don't think you want your legs rubbing up against this. So I think it just needs to go. But this is nice. It's coming off relatively easily. I'll start at the other end and see if I can't work my way into the middle. A lot of times when I do this, it doesn't come off this nicely. It just it kind of comes off in little pieces, and it's like picking glue. And I don't want to dig into the wood underneath it, because I want to keep that pretty much intact. There you go. Pops right off. Set that off to the side. Maybe I'll do something with it, maybe I won't. But let's see what we have here. That looks real nice. Gonna have to clean it up a little bit so that it doesn't flake off later. But that's nice. Now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna run this through a surface planer to just clean the top off a little bit. And I'm back. And what I just did was I went upstairs and I checked another bench that I own. And it comes in at just about 42 inches in width. And that's nice. Lisa and I can both sit on it together. This is going to be a little bit narrower. And the reason for that is because I want to make the whole thing out of this one piece of wood. And that means I need to have enough left over down here to make the legs. But anyway, let's get this cut to width, and then I can sand the remaining bark off of this side. I don't have to worry about that side because I'm only going to use 10 inches of this, not the full 11 and a half. Speaking of which, let's make sure I have enough. And I just have enough. It's 8 inches, not 10 inches. So I've got 1, 2, 3 cuts to make, a kerf of 1/8 of an inch. That's 3/8 of an inch. And I am right at 8 3/8 inches. So just have enough to do this. 1, 2, 3. Yep. So. When you're doing a one-man show, sometimes you have issues. So, all right, but that looks good. This will be milled up into 4 legs. This is the bench. And this can get out of here. Right now they're not square, so I'm going to have to run them through the thickness planer. They're just a little bit thicker than they are wide by probably 3/64 of an inch. Let's see. They're 2 inches wide, and they are 2 3/32. So I need to take a 30/2 of an inch off the tops, and that's why, I don't know if you saw, I took a pencil and marked. That'll help me keep in my mind a relationship of where the top is versus the sides. So that's where we're at. The edge here has to be sanded, so I'm going to work on that now. So I'm just cleaning this up. I'll do this all the way along the edge here, and I'm not going to film this, just kind of boring. But we'll get back together again soon. So I'm in a bit of a pickle here. What I would like to do is along the length, I would like to tilt these legs a little bit like that. But to do that and still maintain balance, I need to inset from the front and from the back. And the problem with that is when I come over here to the front, you can see that because of this angle here, it's not as thick here as it is over here, and I might be able to work with it, but I just have to think about this for a little bit longer. Kind of bothers me that this bench isn't just a little bit wider, and when I say a little bit wider, I mean 1.5 inches, 2 inches wider. But you know, you work with what you have. So let me think on it for a little bit, and we'll see what I come up with. So what I've done is I've cut a 10-degree bevel here, and I'm going to use these blocks to help me do some chisel work. What I'm going to do is let these legs in at about 10 degrees. And when I do that, I have to cut the mortise also at 10 degrees. So I will simply put this block here, and it will guide and I'll clamp it down, and it'll guide my chisel down at 10 degrees. I'll take most of the material out with a Forstner bit, but this will be the final detail work. And I'll have to cut it at 10 degrees here, and 10 degrees there. So I'm going to do mortise and tenon joinery, and this is going to be the tenon. And I don't know if you can see, let me set this down and bring it in a little close. What I did was I took my marking gauge here and I ran it around the perimeter to find how big of a mortise I want it. The mortise will be about that wide. But I just want to take the very edge off, so I'm setting it up so that the saw hits the very edge here. And then I'm going to have to do the same thing on the other end, but I'll need consistency of that cut so that every leg is exactly the same length. We'll get to that a little, later, but for right now, we're going to do this bevel. So this is the first cut. I'm going to remove this part of the tenon. I'll run this through 4 different times, and then I'll have to set up again. And all I have to do is loosen this, take this piece out, grab the next one, lock it in, and this one doesn't have any markings on it, but it doesn't need it because I'm going to get the exact same cut on this as I got on this. And every one of those cuts is exactly the same. have it. Everyone cut exactly the same. Now I have to turn the miter in order to get this side, and that's an additional setup, so let me get to it. It's time to start with the mortises, and what I'm doing here is taking this Forstner bit and taking as much of the wood out of the mortise as I can, and then I'm going to come back with a chisel and do the final bit. I have to be honest with you, I've never done table legs like this before, so this is new, and Holly, I'm really hoping this turns out. But we'll see what happens. I've set the Forstner bit to stop at 1 inch, so all of the cuts should be consistent. And the only thing I haven't done is the bevel, and I'll show you that here in a minute. All right, so this is the first mortise that I'm cutting. And you can see I've got my layout lines right there, all the way around. Now I have to cut a 10-inch bevel from this direction into that direction. You see that? So that's why on this end, I didn't go all the way up to the line, because from there down is where I'll get my 10-inch bevel. And the way I'll do that, as I alluded to before, is I'll take this piece of wood, clamp it down right there, and that's the bevel that I need looking down. And then I'll do the same thing over here, but over here it'll go upside down, and the bevel will go deeper in. And that's going to be a lot of handwork. And you can see down at the bottom that for the most part it is an equal depth, and that'll be important for seating the tenon. 3 more to go. If you look close, you'll see that I've scribed some lines on this, and the lines are 5/16 of an inch. And the reason for that is because my mortise is going to be a 1/2 inch wide. So from here to here will be 1/2 inch. The length of it doesn't matter so much, but my jig, as you'll see in a little bit, is 1/2 inch wide. And what that does is allows me to do this production cut. I just put my tenon up against the fence. The blade is 5/16 of an inch. And that's the rough outline of the tenon. Now I still have material to move, and I can do that in a couple of ways. One, I can use the bandsaw, or I can continue to use the table saw, which is what I'm going to do. And to use the table saw, I'm going to leave the blade at 5/16 of an inch. And now I'm going to put my tenon up against the fence, and I'm just going to pull it back a little bit, and I'm going to, it's called nibbling away. I'm going to nibble away at the material here. There is a quicker way to do that, and that's to remove this blade and put in what's known as a stacked dado set. And all that does is makes my blade wider, and it takes out more material. Now the next problem I have is right here. Because the saw blade cuts with teeth opposing each other, I get these little grooves in here. Now I can clean them up a couple of ways. One, I could take a chisel, and the quicker way is to just use the saw blade. And the way I do that is I turn the saw blade on. The problem is my shoulder here kept catching on this. But anyway, you can see that smooths it out nicely. And I'll do that all the way on this side, and all the way around. And then this cut, the cheek cut, this one right here, I'll use my tenoning jig. I'll show you that in a little bit. This is the tenoning jig. And it rides in the runner right here. It's really sturdy. It's made of cast iron, and it has a couple of adjustments that you need to make. And this takes a little bit of time to set up, but not all that much really. So I want to remove this material here. It's called a cheek cut. And the way I do that is I set this fence up so that I can rest the piece fully in here, clamp it down, and now keeping my hands away from the blade, I can simply run it through. The final adjustment that needs to be made though is blade height. So I'll simply raise the blade to that depth. And now when I put the workpiece in and clamp it down, all I have to do is run my piece through. Loosen the piece, flip it around, tighten it up. And there's my tenon, 1/2 inch thick. I don't care about how wide it is. I do care about how wide it is, but I don't have to be so obsessed about that measurement. And then I have a face of 5/16 of an inch all the way around. And once again, it's not the joint that is going to hold this piece together, it's the glue. And I've just increased the surface area of the glue tremendously. And that's what joinery does, is it increases the surface area of the glue. I've done the layout. I've marked from the top down just over 7 inches, about 7 1/8. And then I've marked the center line of the piece and the length of the tenon. Essentially that length. That length. So I have everything I need on the pieces, and I've got the right faces. That's important. Make sure you cut your mortises in the right locations. And then I've come over here and I've set up my mortise attachment to my drill press. And I've also set the depth of cut to what I want, just over an inch, about 1 1/16. And now it's simply a matter of centering the drill bit on that line that marks the center of the workpiece. I've got that marked. And now what I can do is put a straight edge clamp this down, and I can just run everything through. I don't have to worry about centering it anymore. So let me clamp that and I'll be right back. So now I've set the fence and I can just run the workpiece through. So as you can see, there's a drill bit inside a chisel. The drill bit removes most of the material and it gives me a nice mortise like that. It may need a little cleaning up, but that's how we're going to do it. I've mixed up some epoxy for the glue up, and I'm using it because some of these joints are just a little bit too loose, and the epoxy will fill it, whereas glue does not. The other thing is I've added some sawdust from the project into the epoxy as both a filler and a coloring agent, if you will. And I have to work kind of fast because epoxy has less of an open time than glue does. And I have to think about this for a second because this has to go in a specific way. And before I get going too much further, I want to check to make sure I did that right. Yeah. The other one I actually marked. For whatever reason, I didn't mark this one. It's like watching glue dry now. I don't know if I said, but the sawdust, I added sawdust to this, and the sawdust is actually from the sanding of this piece. So the sawdust has the same color as the wood in the piece. That went in well.